So hi again and welcome to our channel. My name is Allie.
And I'm Stephen and we are the Mindset Junkies. So today we wanted to start tonight's episode with a moment of appreciation. So just to say how grateful we are to know that you are here listening, that you're tuning in, watching this video, tuning into the other videos. And we really hope that you have taken a lot away from the episodes that we've got in so far. Especially, if you are new as well, right? So just welcome. Please do kind of go back to some of the existing videos too, because there is some absolute gold in there, some great conversations and much more lined up coming up as well. So to those who are coming back, once again, as I said, we do truly thank you for being a part of this journey and for keeping on coming back to us. It helps us. And for those who haven't hit the subscribe, please do, because it really, really does help us. It does help us in being able to bring more of this content back to you. But once again, we're massively appreciative of all of you.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So the topic is kind of interesting and will definitely split the room. We want to talk about taking calculated risks versus just plain old-fashioned risk-taking. And I guess the seriousness of the risk very much depends on your life experiences. And for example, you could say that going out in your car every day is a calculated risk. When you think you've got 2-ton plus cars hurtling towards each other with only a dotted line in the road to separate you, that could be deemed as being highly risky, especially if you've had one, if you've had an accident yourself or someone who's been in a serious car accident. Then you're more likely to approach going out in the car very differently to someone who hasn't had an accident. So, risk taking is something that we kind of do every day. But why do we deem risk taking to be, so risky? Is it smart to take risks in life? Sometimes it's good to take a risk when it pushes you outside of your comfort zone and it helps you to achieve, a healthy goal. At other times, taking risks can have serious negative consequences on our health, relationships, or education. And when we think about, entrepreneurs, they are taking calculated risks all the time. Calculated risk taking is defined as the ability to deal with incomplete information, but still act upon that risky option. And that requires skill to just sort of normalize the challenging but realistic goals that you'll actually get out of it. So we talked a little bit earlier on about, being in Vegas and, putting down a particular bet and the turn of that card either being something that you're going to waste and lose an awful lot of money on, or you're going to get a massive reward. And you'll make that decision based on the hand that you've got, but also a kind of thought process around what hand the other players have at the table. And that's pretty much what entrepreneurs do. They kind of decide how they're going to move forward based on what they know about their capabilities, their niche, their market, the rarity or the uniqueness of the product or service. And then they have a look to see what other card holders have got out there. So that could be competition or no competition at all, but also an appetite for that particular product or service to actually get launched and be successful.
Yeah, I think just to add on this, I think the entrepreneur is kind of the epitome of calculated risk taking, isn't it? That they try to pull in as much information from a variety of sources to understand and essentially do the calculated risk part. So there is always a risk with it. I think there's always a risk, as we said, with everything, isn't there? Like you've said yourself before here about driving the car. I think it's Tony Robbins who puts it, isn't it, that when you go out in your car, you don't really think about the possibility that somebody who's driving towards you in the other lane, you're placing a lot of trust in that person.
Yeah.
That suddenly they're not just going to swerve into your lane. And as you said, two cars coming together, it could wipe you out. No question about it. But the thing is, that's become normality, hasn't it, for us? It's become a part of normal life that all these things could happen to us. Every time we leave the home, we are put at risk. But it's then the calculated risk, like what information is available to us to help overcome it, isn't it? as well as normality. Because me going out and saying I'm going to throw all of my money into starting a new innovative startup is massively different to me saying that I'm going to go out in the car and drive to the shop. It's like one is something I've never done before. The other one is something that I maybe do multiple times a week.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Absolutely. And you're right. We take risks every single day in our lives. For example, getting pregnant is a risk. Paying into a pension fund, getting on a plane, even using your bank card nowadays is, can be deemed as being a fairly sort of risky thing to do. Walking home late at night alone, getting turned down by someone you were interested in, you take that risk to ask them out, and you know that there's a chance that they might actually say no. Your business idea not working out. Painting your living room a dodgy paint color just 2 days before Christmas. And I only say that one because I've done it. Crossing the road, you're taking a risk. Getting on the scariest roller coaster, that's a risk. And the one above the stratosphere in Vegas, for me, has to be the scariest one. I just wouldn't do it. There's just no way in a million years I would do that.
I was going to ask if you've done it.
No, there was no way there was no way I was getting on that. I went down the calculated risk, thought process, and I thought, nah, it's just not worth it. The reward doesn't, for me, doesn't outweigh the likelihood of something potentially happening. So I decided not to.
Isn't it weird though that is, I'd never say completely safe, but just think of the amount of safety and rigor that goes into the creation of that thing. And for those who haven't seen it, it's in one of the tallest towers in Vegas, and it's a roller coaster, a very short one, that actually dangles you over the edge of the building and face down. It's incredible. Like Allie, I have not done it. I don't intend to. But, it's interesting that the amount of rigor and safety that goes into that, you could say, yeah, that's a calculated risk, but it's going back to that normality thing, isn't it? It's something that, we don't do every day. You've probably got more chance of being injured or potentially dying by driving to the shop in your car than on that roller coaster.
Absolutely. But it's just the fact that, it's not something that you do every single day. You're not seeing the safety rigor that goes around it and all the audit and checks that are done of every single component. You just see this thing and you think, nah, it'll be just my luck that I'm the one who's in the seat and the buckle breaks, and I see myself hurtling towards, the strip, as it were. So, but we often make and take risks based on a single second of thought. I thought about the stratosphere for days. I thought about going on that roller coaster for absolutely days before the opportunity came, and I bailed. But sometimes we make decisions, we take calculated and non-calculated risks literally within a second's notice. And, I think about, you're waiting to cross the road and you see a gap, but that gap in the traffic is probably just about enough for you to literally sprint across the road. So you make that momentary decision, and then you step out onto the road and you realize that your shoes come off or your laces are undone, or, something happens that you've not thought about that actually makes the risk of you getting hit that more likely. But we do that all the time. But at the end of the day, we make those risks based on the reward outcome. What's in it for me in order to do this? If I cross the road, it means that I can catch the bus that is coming in the other direction, and I have to be on that bus because I need to be home before the kids come home or whatever. We're always thinking about, I'm doing this thing because there is a need, there is a reward, there is something that the outcome of this being a good outcome, is a thumbs up for me.
Yeah, and an interesting one. I got told off back in November, so I got caught by one of the speed cameras. I was naughty. I was doing a 36 in in the UK we have the speed limit cameras for when they're doing roadworks, and it wasn't clear that there was 30, but hey, whatever. And, what they said on the speed awareness course that I did with this is that often people speed because they feel as though they need to be somewhere quicker. But then they actually did some maths with us as we was going through it. So if we go like on a motorway that's traditionally 70 miles an hour, if we go 80, when they've done the maths over the usual distance, which might be like 10, 20 miles or something, it only saves about a minute or two in time over that period. But the thing is, what they've said is the material impact and risk, if you have an accident at 80 mile an hour versus 70, is literally life-threatening.
Yes.
You will probably not survive a certain type of accident at 80 mile an hour, whereas at 70 mile an hour, you probably will. So it's for the sake of a couple of minutes. So, just as you mentioned there, Ali, with the bus, to try and get home that bit earlier, it's weird how our brain works in this respect, that it's because we've become comfortable with driving, going quick. We're like, oh yeah, it'll just be fine. I'll go that 10 mile an hour faster and I'll get home quicker. But then it's like, is the risk really worth it when you actually boil it down and think, okay, so what's the actual gain that I'm going to get from it? And I know this goes against the episode because we're talking about taking calculated risks, but there is also an alternative about an element of common sense with some of this stuff as well, I think.
For sure, yeah. And sometimes I find as well that when you've got time to actually calculate what the outcomes might be, then you're lessening the potential harm that will come to you, but increasing the odds of a positive outcome. And I think that is, for me, the difference between taking a risk and taking a calculated risk. And I know later on you're going to go on and talk a little bit more about the difference between the two. But when I was 19, I made a decision to join the Royal Navy. I think I've mentioned this in previous episodes. And I joined for many reasons, the structure, the discipline, the chance to extend my life experiences, the fitness, people, travel. But somewhere deep down inside, when I was, weighing up the pros and cons of joining the military, I knew that there was a chance that I could be deployed to a dangerous place. But nevertheless, I still felt that the chances were actually quite small to never. And I made that decision based on looking back over the last 20 years, what kind of serious situations had the UK been involved with, where, many of the forces, multiple forces, were sent off to specific areas. And the only one that I could really think about was Ireland. And women at that time were not deployed to Ireland. So it kind of like lessened the possibility of me being deployed to a dangerous place. So I made that calculated assumption that it was worth taking the risk. 2 months after I joined, I was slap bang in a real life war situation. And I have the medal to prove it. I was called up 2 months before the Falklands War started, was when I joined the Royal Navy. So if I'd had the foresight to know that this was actually going to happen, would I have joined up? And I think the point is that I can't ever really answer that question because I'm still here. And hindsight is a wonderful thing. I do know that at the time when all of this happened and all of this kicked off, I was a little bit afraid. I was worried about the outcomes, but in actual fact, it was lucky for me that I was in the Wrens at that time and not the Royal Navy, because women were not sent to sea. They weren't sent into war situations. So it negated the whole thing. But I acknowledged the risk anyway. But instead of going ahead regardless, like I said, I did my due diligence. I did sort of really look back as to, previous conflicts and what were the chances of me being called up. So therefore, in my mind, I had accepted the outcome of the situation should that mushroom cloud go up, which in fact it actually did.
And I think it's natural though as well, isn't it, that even if you obviously took your steps to do some calculated risks there, and even if the worst case scenario had been presented, which it sounds as though it was a pretty bad scenario to what you had predicted to begin with, it was a scary experience. And I think it always would be.
Yeah.
And I think it's just recognizing, isn't it, that it's dealing with kind of the card that you dealt with at that time, at that point.
Yeah, but it was definitely character building. It's nothing quite like being in a situation that really tests your resolve, your capabilities as a person to, push on through and actually still come out of it feeling and being a better person. That was definitely a really good calculated risk to take. It was most definitely character building. Would I do the same thing today? Possibly not, because it's a different Royal Navy now, and it's a different Royal Navy for women as well. And the world's a different place as well. So, yeah, I think if I was in the same situation again, I would possibly not join the military, simply because I think there is much more risk involved nowadays than perhaps it was back in 1982. Yeah.
So they're doing a recalculation. So Allie won't be joining the Navy anytime soon. So, you've given a great example there of you taking a calculated risk, right? And I've also given an example there where people do tend to take a risk. The speeding is a prime example where every time that you go 80 mile an hour on a motorway, you are taking a risk. And it's not only a risk for you, but you're also putting other people's lives at risk. Hey, look at me, I've done my self-awareness course. I'm a preacher now. But basically, I think it's good for us to talk about basically what the difference is between a risk and a calculated risk. Okay, so a calculated risk, it's one that, just as Allie demonstrated, is taken after this careful consideration of things like the probability that the risk might actually happen, what the potential impact of it could be to you and potentially to other people as well, and also what the rewards are. So what gains you expect from the scenario that you're going to go into, if it actually plays out, what you will actually get from it. These can actually be contrasted with risks that are basically taken unknowingly, or it could be without much of any kind of evaluation based on, it could be things like a lack of optimism, or it could be a lack of due diligence from you as well. Now, from a risk perspective, this is something like uncertainty or maybe chances of some form of damage or liability that could begin to occur. So a prime example, a bit of extreme one, is that if you like jumping out of an aeroplane, but you do it without a parachute, then you will probably end up dead, quite frankly. But a calculated risk, it's something like, just as Allie demonstrated, you're taking the risk, but with full knowledge of what the outcome could be in different types of scenarios. And basically hoping that you've done your calculations, just as Allie did, saying that, it doesn't look as though there's going to be a deployment anywhere that's severely dangerous, because there's not been much kind of going on in that sense for the last X number of years, decades, and so on. But you go for it hoping that is still going to be the case. There's often there's no guarantees that it is actually going to be the case. But it is, in a way, if you think of the calculated risk side of things, it's like jumping out of a plane with a parachute. There is still a risk that the parachute will not open. I actually saw a video the other day, and I don't know how the guy kept so calm. There was actually a video of his parachute failing. And they always have a backup parachute as well. But it was the way that he went about it. It was like he knew that if the first one failed, which it did, it got all tangled up and he couldn't do it. Instead, he just cut it. Like within about 5-10 seconds, he'd cut the parachute, it shot off, and he'd released his second parachute. And he was like, you could see his face, and he didn't even look fazed by this. Now, he is probably a really experienced pro, because I can guarantee, I've never jumped out of a plane, but if I were doing skydiving and I think I would be in absolute bits if my first parachute failed. I'd probably not even be able to pull the second one because I'd be panicking too much. But, that's just an example of what the calculated risk is, that when you jump out of a plane and you've got your parachute on your back, that you have that parachute, but you also know that you have got the backup parachute in case that one's failed. So that's your calculated risk. Okay. So just to reiterate with this example of jumping out of the plane, the calculated risk is about doing it with the parachute on. It is still very dangerous. It could fail. The backup parachute could still fail. It could result in death. But, there is a very, very small chance that that would happen. I don't know what the failure rate of parachutes is, but I do understand it must be less than 1% per parachute. And then you've got your second parachute as well. So the probability of both failing is incredibly light. So it's now time for me to talk about an example when I'm talking calculated risk. And this is an interesting topic because it's like me and Ali were having a good discussion before we started recording this, and the way that this shows up in both of our lives. Now, for me, I've been brought up, like both my parents were massively risk averse. Even calculated risks were rarely taken. Like if I could go to my mum with an idea even today as to what I want to do, then she's always looking on the I want to protect him, look after him, make sure that he's making the right choices kind of thing. So that I am going to be quite pessimistic about these things. So for me, battling with that is incredibly tough. It's incredibly tough because it's the way that I've been brought up, and it's essentially what speaks to some of my core values. That security is one of my highest values, just because the way that I've been brought up, beliefs, all that kind of thing. And one thing for sure, like me and Ali working through this stuff, like working together, bringing this kind of material to you, also what is going to be coming at some point soon around this, is the whole different pathway to everything that I have worked hard for in my entire life. So many of us are taught to, you go to school, you get good grades, you go to university, you then get a good job, you then climb the corporate ladder, you get a house, you get married, you have children, all that, the traditional path, right? But then it's like there is a lot of alternative pathways out there as well. And it's about the calculated risks around what those alternatives are. You just look at some of the crazy entrepreneurs like Elon Musk who gamble everything, right, for potentially, you could argue, saving the world, but also kind of his own agenda as well. That to me, that is a million miles away from where I could ever be. Like people like Mark Zuckerberg who have quit Harvard University to start his startup. Could never find myself doing that, really, could not. But in terms of the calculated risk part, in terms of me and my situation, so I have a very stable job. It's an interesting job. It's not my passion, to be honest. I think a lot of people know that. The coaching space is, I'm the single or the most earner in the household, and I have a wife and 2 children that we need to care for. So in whatever I am doing in this journey, it is all about taking a calculated risk. It's not diving in there full throttle and going, right, what I want to do is I'm not fulfilled by my work entirely, so here's my letter of resignation. It's about understanding what is it that I can do in my current role, in my current position with my current company, to basically grow what it is, to grow my experience, offer value back into the business, into the people, do things that helps others inside the company that I work for, whilst also then taking the lens and going outside as well. And thinking, what is it that I can do for other people in the public domain to potentially grow the brand, grow the presence, grow the awareness of everything that I'm striving to achieve within the future. And now that is a calculated risk, because what I'm doing is I'm not disrupting anything on the security side. So yeah, it might take a lot away from the hours that I'm able to contribute on the passion side of things, but it means that that is safe and that is secure. But it still means I'm able to grow the other side of things. So as I've said, the only disadvantage with this is that it's the amount of time that is available to then focus on that passion side of things. And in terms of calculated risks on this, it's also sacrifices in terms of things like family and personal life as well. Because this obviously takes a hit, that there might be times on a weekend that I'm needing to get stuff done to fuel the passion project. Like prime one is, I've got an exam this weekend that I've got to do for some studies at university. That's going to take from a couple of hours that I've got from spending time with my children. But that's something that if we're looking at the bigger risk and reward side of things that we'd mentioned, that is something that is a really important consideration to have. You got to think of the end game as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, and that's, you can understand where that thinking and that prioritization comes from, and it is that balancing act, isn't it? It's that, you know, you put the effort in now in order to fuel your passion, but what that's going to happen is that the reward outcome at some point, hopefully in the very near future, is actually going to give you the due diligence that we talked about do you actually give up your corporate life now, and then do you actually work full time on your passion, or do you scale one back and scale one up, because you've made some of those sacrifices early on because you already feel that there's merit in actually doing that. It's like couples that have been together for years and years, they have children, they have a home, they have a mortgage, they have a lot of material things, and one of them decides to walk away from it at some point and give it all up. They walk away with literally two suitcases and they leave their lives behind them, because they know that yes, they've got nothing at the moment, and they're walking away from a massive 20-25 year investment, both of themselves but also financially. But they know that the reward that will come is something that's actually in their gift to themselves to be able to do, because they want to get away from a toxic or relationship or domestic abuse or whatever it happens to be. And they start all over again, because the reward at that time, based on their due diligence, it's worth walking away from that situation. So the risk to them is staying, but the calculated risk is actually walking away.
Yeah.
And I think there's times in our life and situations in our life where, taking that calculated risk will actually work in your favor. And it makes it easier to see through and actually take, because you have been able to do that due diligence. But you cannot know what your outcome is going to be unless you actually go for it.
I think it's a great example that in the communities we're in, we do see so often, don't we, of people who are in those kind of relationships that feel as though they're trapped and that there's nothing that they can do around it. But there completely is. It's incredibly hard. It's just, as you say, Allie, it's figuring out what the calculated risks are around it.
Yeah.
And then taking the action.
Absolutely. So maybe we could talk a little bit right now about the advantages of taking calculated risks. What would you suggest these advantages are?
Yeah, so I think one of the first ones here, it's recognizing the fact that if we was in a world where nobody took any risks, then we'd be living in a very, very strange world, right? So if you think about everything that exists in our modern life, if you think of airplane flight, the Wright brothers, how many times did they risk their lives in trying to create a flying machine? If you think about the horse, right, at what point did someone decide that they was going to take the risk, that they was going to jump on the horse's back and hope that it didn't go absolutely crazy, throw them off and potentially kill them? And that feeds all the way through into things like cars. Like when cars first came into existence, what the belief was that if you traveled at over 30 miles an hour, your head would explode. But look at us now, some of the speeds that we go and do, it's just absolutely crazy. I was
behind the driver just like that today as well. I thought I was never going to go over 25.
Yeah. So it's like there's that recognition that if we didn't take a risk, then we'd be living in a very strange world. And, some of our risks may be very small. Some of them may be absolutely huge. But it's recognizing that there is a place in our lives for taking calculated risks. And we just need to understand them, measure them, and take them.
Yeah.
The other thing is about us learning from taking risks. Now, in my first role that I had when I first joined Salesforce, we really did preach this, because the customers we were working with didn't quite get a concept of what we call experimentation. And an experimentation is all about taking risks, but doing it in a very, very calculated way. It's like, rather than spending £100,000 on a project to test an idea, let's just do something very small, very micro. Let's do it for a couple of weeks and just see if it works. Because the calculated part, there was actually one client that we worked with that actually offered us a small package of money to go off and run this specific project. And I said, no, we shouldn't do it this way. Let's just mock the thing up in PowerPoint presentations, put it in front of an audience of your customers and see what they think. So we mocked up the entire experience using PowerPoint. Took less than a week's worth of effort to do. And then we got immediate feedback, which then gave us a view of whether it was going to work or not to then move forward with the potential bigger project.
Yeah.
So, we learn a lot from that exercise, and this applies to all of life, right? Instead of looking at it as a really big thing of like, think of Elon Musk and his flying to Mars. It's not like one day he goes, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a rocket. I'm going to do that right now, and I'm going to fly this rocket all the way to Mars with a boatload of passengers on it. It doesn't do that. It takes, as we've mentioned throughout a lot of episodes so far, it's about the incremental steps on the journey of what small thing do I need to do. So if we talk about Elon's sense, it's that he started off with basically building a rocket. That was his one of it. There'll obviously be steps before this as well. He then started by taking a payload to space. He then started by taking passengers to the space station, well, astronauts to the space station. Now he's looking at passenger flights into space. Next, he'll be looking at a mission to Mars. Then he'll be looking at a passenger mission to Mars. So it's like about all these incremental steps that are going up, and we're learning from every single one about what we get from taking risks.
Yeah.
And then the next one is about kind of demonstrating the level of confidence that taking risks has. So it helps you stand out as an individual that, if you are taking calculated risks, it could be in your life. I guess this could be more pointed towards the career side of things. Like many people may say that, if leaving your job may be a risky thing, but if you know that there is an opportunity on the other side, a really good, strong one, then to you, it's not a risk. But then other people might look at that and go, oh, wow, look at that person. They had a really stable thing here, and now they're going for this. That's absolutely incredible. Well, then as a person who's doing it, yourself that you've got it covered. You've done your calculations. You've taken that calculated risk. And it's like other people are looking at you and thinking, wow, it's brilliant.
I know. It's like I'm thinking about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, who started off selling books, and then when he started to pivot and shift and start selling lots of other things, I imagine a lot of people thought, "Wow, that's a gutsy move. That guy's got bags of confidence. What is it that he knows that we don't know?" So definitely demonstrating massive amount of confidence in himself, but very much putting himself out there. You can't hide from making gutsy moves like that, can you?
Yeah, definitely agree. So the next one, which, Bezos is a good example of this. Elon Musk is a good example of this. Hell, like me and Allie are great examples of this too. So recognizing that without actually taking a risk, there is actually no chance of you winning. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if Elon Musk hadn't invested in space, if he hadn't founded SpaceX, there was no chance of him building a rocket. There was no chance of him going to Mars, absolutely zero. With Bezos, if he didn't believe in his idea about selling books on the very first version of Amazon, there's no way that Amazon would have existed in the way that it does today. Mm-hmm. With both me and Ali pursuing this journey, it's like if we didn't record episode number 1, well, probably even talk about episode number 1, then we wouldn't be on here 17 episodes later, kind of talking about this topic about taking risks.
Yeah, you've got to put yourself out there. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So the next one then is about, it's teaching you more about yourself. And I think, Ali, your example really hits home with this, that you said, whilst you're unsure if you would make that same decision today, it was actually character building. There was a lot that you learned throughout that experience. And, I think that's the same for a lot of other risks that we do take in our life, that we learn a lot about ourselves, regardless of what the outcome is.
Yeah. Absolutely. I learned an awful lot about myself, going through that process. So you're absolutely right.
You'd be surprised when when the going gets tough a little bit in some senses. Like I was saying to Ali before this, that what I tend to do every 6 months is withdraw my pension out of my work pension, put it into my private, well, it's still a pension, but it's called an SIPP in the UK. And it means that I have freedom to invest in whatever stocks that I want. And it's been quite a rough ride, as any people in stocks and shares at the moment would attest to. And what it's done in teaching me, though, is my resilience around it, because I'm looking at the sea of red that is occurring across there. And I'm like, I'm not touching it. As soon as I touch it, I know that money's lost. But at the moment, probably quite foolishly in some cases, I don't know. It's cementing the losses. So, I'm happy to look at that, because all I know is that there is potentially only one way, which is hopefully up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, so what we've done throughout, so I think those are the 5 key reasons. We've kind of established that taking calculated risks is a much better option than just going ahead and taking a risk and diving right into it. And a number of examples have come alight here. So take Allie's example of just going, oh, right, great, I'm going to go and join the Navy. I'm going to go and join the Army. I'm going to join the RAF. I'm not going to do any research. I'm just going to do it. Then the roller coaster with in Vegas, like Allie, I'm just going to go and do it. I'm just going to dive straight in there. Whatever happens, happens. Parachute, I'm not going to check, see for parachutes on my back. I'm just going to go and dive straight out the plane. Things like that. Well, there are some kind of steps that we would recommend that, we are advocating, obviously, that you have to take calculated risks. And to do this, here's some things that we recommend. So the first one is about the level of research. So just like Ali did with her role going into the Navy, did lots of research, understood what the different options were, understood what the potential was of different events happening. You really do need to understand what the different things that could happen, may happen, will happen are. Because essentially what this does, it basically gives you time to discover any of the red flags or potential issues that you may be faced with. And then give you the option to mitigate against them. It also gives you the view of, is the reward actually big enough for you to then go ahead and actually take the risk? Or do you need to potentially do more due diligence? The next one is to recognize that you will make mistakes. So before executing a decision on a risk, just think about all the different possible outcomes. Consider the positive ones, but really focus and hone in on some of the negative ones and understand, are you prepared to accept that they could be a reality for you? Don't just get suckered into thinking, oh yeah, I've got all these like 10 positive experiences, one of them's bound to come off, so I'll not bother looking at the negative ones, because chances are one of those could still come up. And if you're not prepared for it, that's probably the worst position that you could be in. At least having visibility means that, as we said with the first one, you can still begin to mitigate against them. So then the next one is about setting checkpoints and goals. So calculated risks, they are basically marked by a number of different checkpoints. So if we basically put these in place well before we actually go ahead with making a decision, it'll actually help us to basically identify when a risk becomes too high for your tolerance. Like I mentioned about myself with my pension, stocks and shares, the prime example here is, if you're looking to go into the stocks and shares piece, it is around stop losses. Putting those in place so that if your investment does drop to a certain point, you can automatically trigger a sale. And you can also do the same for purchase as well, that when the stock actually hits a certain amount, well, it actually should be going down because you should be buying it when it's low, then you basically trigger the purchase. The next one is about being willing and ready to pivot. So it doesn't matter how calculated the risk is, just as we said, you should be having your mitigations around what some of those potential scenarios could be if it doesn't actually work out. And you need to know what your strategy is to actually begin to handle some of those things as well. You can't always control the result. You have to recognize that. But the thing that you can control is how you respond to that result. Now, the final one here is about not being afraid of the word no. Learn to say no. If you jump into every single opportunity that comes your way, you will not have the resources to take the opportunities that have a high probability of succeeding. this is where you also have to do the research, the due diligence into the things that, you might really, really want to do, and there might be not very much negative side to them, right? But if there is something that you're more driven to, that you're more passionate about, that you want to go with than something else, then it might be that even though this thing might look as though it's really likely to come off, it's really likely to be a success for you, that it will just take too much resource away from you. Could be time, could be money, and so on. So it becomes a bit of a detrimental effect on some of those other things.
Yeah, I've got a really good example of that, that last point in terms of, learning to say no, and looking at those checkpoints and tolerances. So it actually worked in my favor, but it didn't for the holiday company. So when the Icelandic volcano erupted, that's probably about 13 or 14 years ago, it sent an ash cloud over the UK and most of Europe. And I was on holiday in the Dominican Republic at this time. And the volcano erupted 2 days before I was due to travel home. So I was on this beautiful island in a 5-star all-inclusive hotel. And when the cloud went up, obviously we couldn't travel home because it was too dangerous. So the travel company had to extend our holiday, all inclusive, everything paid for by the travel company, for a further 5 days. And then in an effort to actually try and get us back home, as close to home as possible, they then flew us to Portugal, and we had another 5-star all-inclusive holiday for a further 5 days. And then as the ash started to deplete, the only other way that they could get us home was a 3-day cruise back to the UK on a ship that had never sailed with any passengers. We were their maiden voyage.
Wow.
So I ended up having another, 13, 14-day holiday paid for by the holiday company. But yet, despite the advance warnings of the volcano erupting well before it did, the travel companies took the calculated risk of fulfilling customers' holidays. So what they could have done is they could have said, look, the ash cloud is about to go up. We need to get you back home. We appreciate that you've either just started your holiday or you're partway through it. What we would like to do is to bring you back home, but basically refund you another holiday again, in a like-for-like kind of way. And still have those customers as returning customers. But in actual fact, it ended up costing them probably 10, 15 times more than it would have done actually not doing anything and not pulling people out of their holiday or their holiday locations. So they didn't quite look at those particular checkpoints. They didn't look at those gates, and they didn't look at those tolerance levels. They just kept taking their risk. I would say it was an uncalculated risk that, the volcano won't erupt and therefore we'll be okay. But in actual fact, it did end up backfiring for them. But my husband and I ended up having a wonderful extended holiday. So, the formula that you've just laid out perfectly should really work for every aspect of your life. We're not just talking about, for entrepreneurs. It should happen in your private life, your relationships. What dog do I get? Do I get, a pedigree dog, or do I get, a bog standard mutt? What is the risks of having a pedigree dog, and as opposed to, just having a normal little, spaniel or whatever. And there are calculated risks and formulas that you can take and make in every aspect of your life so that you actually get the outcomes that you can expect for yourselves.
I love that story. I think anyone would welcome an extra 13 days of a holiday, all told, and taking in an extra location plus the cruise, naturally.
It was amazing. My colleagues were really, really pretty jealous.
Yeah, and I would have thought that you wouldn't have had your work laptops or potentially phones on you at that point. So it would have been a holiday.
It was a pure holiday. There was no
Brilliant.
work stuff that went with me. And I was very lucky as well that my work actually saw it as a sort of force majeure, and I didn't have to take any of my holiday entitlement for the extra 13 days that I had as well. So yeah.
Just gets better.
Pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So I hope you get the message throughout this that, you know, the key is that you should be taking risks in your life, but doing it in that calculated way and understanding what could go really, really well, but then also what might not, and that kind of risk versus reward strategy that comes into play around that as well. So once again, we hope that you've basically found some really good insight and inspiration from some of this topic and also some of the stories that we've shared. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Give this video a like. Comment with any of your thoughts. It's always welcomed. We will always respond to some of those comments. In terms of the subscribing, it's always a free way that you can basically help us out, and it's no effort from you. Literally, there should be a subscribe button appearing for you to do so if you haven't already. So thank you, and once again, all the best.
Thank you. See you again.